Hello and welcome back to the shed. In today's episode we're going to be taking this rough sawn dirty old piece of jarrah and squaring it up ready to be used in a future project. Hope you enjoy. For the job of preparing this piece of jarrah for the future project, I'm going to be using 3 hand planes and just a couple of different squares. The first plane is this old Falcon Pope number 5 that I have here. I've got this set up with a cambered blade, which is a radius on it, so it takes off a rough amount of timber in very fast fashion. If you could get a scrub plane, that would work the same, but this is a cheap way of having the same effect of a scrub plane. Next is my record number 5.5. I'm going to use this because of its longer length. It'll be good for flattening the surfaces out. You could use a number 6. My number 6 is blunt at the moment, so I'm just going to go ahead and use the number 5.5, and to show you that a 5.5 will actually do the job that the 6s and the 7s will do as well, as long as you're a little bit careful with it. And thirdly, I'm going to be using this Stanley Bailey number 4, and this is set up with quite a fine set for taking off that final smoothing for the project. So the first step that we do here is we have to check whether there's any twist in the board. Now, this has a little bit of twist. There's a little bit of a rock, and if you're careful, you can probably hear it. Turn it over the other side. We have a very big rock on this side. Now, traditionally, you would use a set of winding sticks on either end here, and I'll put a picture up here of what winding sticks look like. And you put them on either end to see if there's any twist in the board before you start. I don't have any of them, so what I do is I flatten off one side, then I will use the square to get 2 square edges off that, and then I flatten the other face off those 2 sides. Now, I find that works quite well, and for a small piece like this, it's rather effective, I think. So the first process here is we use our scrub plane, or just our roughing plane. So I'm going to start with this plane, and we're going to take a couple of runs across the timber just to take our first sort of look at the board. So I have this set quite fine, and as you can see here, you can see there's a few shiny bits just here where it's just skimmed the surface. I don't want to go really aggressive on this board because I want to maintain as much of the thickness as possible. Now, normally when you're roughing a board like this, going across the grain like this way is actually the best way to achieve the heavy removal. In this case, I don't think this is this rough, so I'm just going with the grain because it's always going to be easier if you can go with the grain. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm going even across the board, so I'm taking an even amount right the way across. So that's why you might have seen I took a run here and then I took a second one here, because that second run on this side is for the next movement back across the board. Now, in some cases, if it's really rough, this can be quite a long process. With a small board like this, it doesn't actually take too long, and it's pretty quick and easy. So, after about 3 or 4 passes across, you can see here that these dark parts here are the rough parts. These smooth parts is where the plane's hit and already taken the rough material off. So we just need to keep going until we've taken all of this dark spots down to where the smooth area is. So we've just got to keep running across the board until all these dark saw marks disappear off this board. Now, you can certainly wax the sole of these planes to help them travel across the wood, and that is a good idea quite often. And the other thing is, if you're struggling to get a cut and you'd like to get a slightly deeper cut, if you have the plane straight like this, it's going to cut as deep. But if you rotate it to about a 40 degrees, 45 degrees, and you run along, you're going to end up taking a deeper cut because it changes the angle that the blade approaches the board. And also angling across like that on a thinner board, it allows you to get more reference across the board. The other thing you have to bear in mind when you're actually doing this is when you start, you don't want the plane to be tipping like this, because then you'll scallop out this end. And when you get at the top end, you don't want your plane to be tipping the other way, so you don't scallop out that end. So the idea is, when you start, you keep the blade just off and keep all your pressure on the front here. So instead of it dropping, you keep it flat. And then when you're pushing through, you know it's keeping flat. When you get down this end, as your blade starts to leave the board, because you want your blade to go right through and leave the board to ensure you've got it shaving right the way across, with your backhand here on the tote, make sure you're keeping your weight down so when it hangs off the end, you've still got it sitting flat, so you've got none of this rocking movement on the ends of the boards. So now I've been across this, we can see that there's only one dark spot here. And this spot seems to be a little bit lower on this board, so there's a split here, and I'm most likely going to cut the board off here. I'm not going to worry about that too much. If you did want it, you'd have to keep going until that's all gone. So now we've done that, we need to flatten this out. So we're going to move from the scrub plane to the 5.5, and what we're going to be doing, and I'll put a little image on there that shows you what we're doing, but because the blade is cambered on our scrub plane, it's going to leave little divots like this, so little half moon shapes in the surface. So the idea is to bring this plane in here, which has got the same length sole in this case. If you have one with a longer sole, that'd be good for making sure it's flat end to end. But in this case, this blade is completely flat with the corners turned off. And that means when we come across, we'll be taking those little divots out and actually making the board flat. So it's the same process that we did with the scrub plane, and you've just got to keep working until you think that it's flat right across. Now, for judging that, you can hold your plane along, and I'll show you a close-up of this, but where it's not flat, you'll be able to see light under the hand plane. So you can actually run it right along like this and judge. If you don't want to use your hand plane, the other thing is you can take your square and run your square along like this and tip your square, and you can see the light on this as well. What I didn't do on the scrub plane, but I'm going to do on this plane, is just a little bit of candle wax. And you just run a bit of candle wax, and that allows the plane to skim across the surface of the board easier with less resistance, and all the force of you pushing is the cutting edge actually cutting the fibers. Of course, you want to make sure that your blade is square across for this, so you end up with the desired effect of making the board flatter. Now, what I've just done here is I've adjusted the blade so it's not really taking any shaving. So I can then advance it slowly using my finger here on the wheel until it starts to bite, and then I will judge what's going to happen after that, but I will most likely take a slightly deeper cut. Now I'm getting some little tiny shavings here, so I'm just going to run with this for a little bit and just take those high points off. I'm still taking really, really fine shavings, so I'm just going to take a little bit of a deeper cut. And at this stage, I'm going to start checking. What we do is we bring the plane along the edge here, and we're looking for any gaps. Now, any gaps where light's coming through, they are the low points. Now, it looks like we're pretty good on this one, but there's one low point on either side here, which means we need to take out some more material right through the middle. After that's done, we can then move on to the smoothing plane. Now, in this case, because there's only so little there, I'm going to move straight onto my smoothing plane now. So now we're moving on to the smoothing plane. We're looking to do the same process. It's a good idea to get some candle wax on there. And we're going to move ourselves across the board like this. Now, we can see we're getting some pretty good shavings. You rarely get full-length shavings on Jarrah because of the grain. So I'm just going to run across it a couple of times like this. And we're getting pretty fine shavings here. And then we come back in, run the plane along like this again. Now in this case, it's showing that I've taken a little too much off in the middle. So I'm going to take one run down each side and we'll see if that solved it. And then we come back in and we look again. And this edge is now flat. All right. So now we've got this side square and flat. We need to square this edge off it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the face vise here for a bit of safety, because balancing it on the side there can be a little bit dangerous and it can move. So for this, I've got a straight edge. We're going to put this along here, and we can see to start with that it's high here and high just here. So what we're going to do is we will use the 5.5 with the longer plane, and we will take the shavings until we get it flat along here, and then we'll come back and recheck it and test for that flatness. So what we do is we hold this plane here. We need to make sure that we've got that same tipping motion that I told you about before, so we've got to watch out for that. And we have to balance it on top of the piece of wood. Now, I like to hold it like this, just to give it a little bit of extra support on the edge, and then I keep my fingers up against the edge. And I'll take a pass. So after 3 passes there, if we look at this, we've still got some high spots here and here, and a little bit here, a few ridges along there, so we've just got to do another few passes to deal with that. So if we look at this now, we're smooth right the way along. Yes, we've got a little radius on this corner, but we might have to deal with it, or we can plane that out when we deal with the other side of this board. So now I'm going to come back into the vise, use my straight edge again, and I'm going to look for where we're high and where we're low. So looking at this, we are high from about here to here. So we use the pencil and we mark those spots. We're also high just from here, so right here. So now I know that we need to take a little bit off here and a little bit off from that gap there. So what I do now is I bring the plane back in, and I'm going to start with this bit here. And it's just one pass like that. So when you're entering and leaving something like that and you want to leave it, as you're pushing the plane, you just start to lift it. And as soon as you stop taking a cut, you've evened that in. Now, the same when you want to start, you can't just put it flat and start. You should lift the toe, the heel of it rather. We lift the heel slightly, and then as we push into it, we drop it and then lift it again. So now we've done that, we bring our straight edge back in again. And we look to see Now we're high from here. We're still high at this end. So we get that pencil and we mark it to here. Now what I'm doing is I'm actually looking through this side and I can see the light under the ruler. Now for this finessing I am using the shorter plane because the shorter sole just means that you can ride the undulations of the board a little bit easier. And now when I put this on here, that is looking pretty flat to me. Alright, so now we know that we're even across this edge, so this edge is flat. We're now going to take it out of the vise, use our square up against our reference face, and we're going to run right the way up the board and look to see where we're out. Now remember, when we're doing this, it's very important that you keep that fence flat up against your reference face. Down that end, I don't know if you can see it, but we're out a lot on this side here by a good 1.5 millimeters. As we run up, we're out by about 1 millimeter on this side here. And then we pretty much out by 1 millimeter right the way up until we get right up this top edge here. So what that tells me is that this side right along here is high, and that we're going to need to take a little bit more off down the bottom end than up this top end. So what I'm going to start to do is do a staggered cut where I run right through to here in one pass. The next pass comes through a little bit less. Next one comes in less. Next one comes in less, and then it's just that last bit. And that should help to alleviate that it's out more down this end than this top end. So I'm going to use my number 4 again. And so when we do this, if you look at the plane here, we have a little offset of about 4 or 5 millimeters right on the edge here where the blade doesn't cut. Now, so if we line this up on here and we push it to this face, we know we're not going to be cutting for the first 4 or 5 millimeters on this outside edge. Now it's this side away from the camera that is high. Now a board that's a little bit wider like this board, which is about 21 mils, we can actually bring it across from that edge a little bit more to make sure we're really hitting this far edge here. Now when we hold this, we need to make sure we keep the weight over this side to keep this in contact with the wood and to keep it flat. And I like to grab just in here, keep my fingers up against that reference face and just hold it down and run it through. Now you want your planes to be nice and sharp while you're doing this, but you also want to have quite a fine shaving so you don't end up going too far, because it's easy while trying to do this to actually take it too far and make things worse. So we don't want to do that, but it's in and out of the vise, noting where you have high spots and low spots. Now once you've squared one face and one edge, that could be all you want to do. Say you want to narrow this board, you then take a reading, a marking off this side and cut it. If you wanted to use this side as it is, you would obviously have to flatten that to the sides. If you were going to resaw it, then you'd resaw that off and you'd be alright. Now that we've got these two square, if this is the thickness of board we want, we go ahead and we'll square this side identically to that side. But really you only need 2 reference faces. Now, we make some reference marks. Now, on the face, we put a triangle that points to the side that is going to be our reference face that's been squared off this. And on the top here, I like to do a little squiggle out from that. So now I know that these 2 points are my reference faces when I come back to use this board. This side up here, if we wanted that to be squared to it, we could do that the same way. Or if you were going to cut it, you'd run this off your fence or off your marking gauge to mark it, saw it off, and then square that back to it. We can do one last check to make sure that we haven't taken more off one end than another. and that is to adjust our square and bring it right the way through like this. So I don't know if you could see that, but along this edge, our board is narrower here than it is down here. So we need to remove this off. Now, this is about 3 or 4 millimeters. About 3 or 4 millimeters here, which is really too little a material to use a saw on. So I'm going to grab my scrub plane, take that back, smooth it out, and then we'll be good. So it's going back into the vise, lock down, grab the equivalent of a scrub plane, and we have to just keep sighting so we know that we're in the right spot. So now I'm getting pretty close to that line. I'm then going to switch from the scrub back to my number 5. And now we have the board the same right the way through. So now I'm going to go back to my number 4 hand plane. Few smoothing passes through. As you can see from our reference mark, this was the face we initially did. This is the edge we squared. I've now gone ahead and squared this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same mark on this side, because I've planed them both off and I can use either of them as reference faces. The last thing we need to look at is whether we have any twist in the board. And you can see here that we're rocking, which means we're high here and high here. So if we just went ahead and hand plane that, we'd have it rocking all over the place and there'd be no guarantee that we could take that twist out. So what I'm going to do is take this back across here, and I could see that it was rocking off this corner here and this corner here. So when we turn it back over, we are high on this corner here and this corner here. So I'm going to turn this board around, and what we're going to do is hand plane on an angle from here to here. Now the idea is that right along that line is most likely high, so when we go from corner to corner and we're resting the longer plane on there, we reference that and we should be able to plane it. Now in this case we're probably just going to plane this edge and this edge here, because it's unlikely that it's on an angle right through. So now that we've done that, we put it back and we test it again. So I'm going to switch to my number 4 and do this a little differently now. I'm going to run the plane down here, and then I'm going to come up here and just take small shavings off in both of these spots. And now we're getting pretty much no rocking here at all. We'll come back and check that we're square again. We are still square. So now we've taken the twist out of the board. Now, for the project I'm going to be doing, this is just going to be rough. I don't want it saw mark rough. So what I'm going to do is bring the scrub plane in. So I've roughed this up now with the scrub plane. I've taken most of these saw marks out. I'm just going to use my flat blade here to flatten it out, and then I'm done on this side. So as you can see here, I've smoothed this out. There's still a few little bits of the saw marks here, but I've got the majority of it off. I've got all the dirt off the wood, and it's pretty flat. although this is most likely going to be on the inside of whatever project I'm doing next, I prefer to take it to this stage, and then I know if I want to take it further when I actually come to do the project, I can just smooth it because I know it's already flat and good to go. Now, if it sits around for too long due to wood movement, you're going to want to replane the outside of it anyway. So I'm happy to leave it here, and we're good and we'll be good with that. The last thing I need to do, since I've replaned this face here, is to put my triangular mark back in here to say this is a reference on both sides. So now I know that I've got these two sides that are parallel and square to each other, and that this face is flat to it. So there you have it, folks. That is how you smooth up your board, have your sides square, produce your reference edges and faces, so you're ready to do your joinery on your next project. I used 3 hand planes in this video. You could get away with using 1. All you would have to do is just do a little more checking and rely on your straight edge a lot more. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw in this video and would like to support me and allow me to continue making these great videos for you, please consider liking and subscribing and checking out my Facebook and Instagram pages. I also encourage you, if you have any questions related to the content in any of my videos, please leave it in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. Thank you.